So, Steve, welcome to the Everymind at Work podcast. How are you?
Thank you. Yeah, very good. Thanks. Yeah, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. We're just catching up about saying there's not enough time in the day and how we're
No,
both quite busy at the moment, but we can't complain, right?
I know. No, absolutely not at all. Obviously, it's a difficult time for everyone, I think, and everyone has their own challenges. So certainly, no complaints from my side.
So I'm looking forward to this interview. Obviously, you've got a lot of experience sort of in the HR space. Also,
Yeah.
kind of, looks like we share a lot of sort of similar values in terms of being open, honest, kind and looking at almost the workplace in a different way. So really kind of looking forward to sort of, hearing some of your insight. But can we just start by what do you currently do today? What's the Steve of today?
Yeah. So I've actually set up my own HR consultancy, HertsHR. Hearts after Hertfordshire, which is where I live, and it's just helping small businesses and the MDs basically of small businesses with any of their particular HR issues. I like to have some of the focus on well-being aspects and creating good environments for people to work in, but basically just helping out SMEs with any of their either offering HR support or advice and or setting up an HR department for them.
Nice. And how did you, before you obviously become or started your own consultancy, what was you doing before that?
So I worked too many years that giving away my age now, but for 20 years I worked in the corporate world of HR. So worked across a number of businesses. I started off in the healthcare sector, private healthcare sector, always done HR, but then moved down to London and did a 9 month stint at lastminute.com on a contract role. And then I moved into financial services, so HR within financial services. So initially banking with Lehman Brothers, and for obvious reasons left there in 2008 with the collapse of the bank, and then moved into the world of online trading, and again doing HR there for 11 and a half years, and that was on a global basis. So I spent a year in Sydney, Australia. So yeah, wide variety of experience across the whole HR spectrum, to be honest.
Nice. And it sounds like a lot of those, jobs were almost bigger organizations and obviously now sort of working with SMEs. What's the kind of differences that you've seen in terms of, their organizational structure, but also their approach to well-being? Is it different in your opinion?
I think, yeah, I definitely think that there is. I just think in general that there's a change in approach to well-being. So in terms of bigger companies and smaller companies, I think that the offering is the biggest change, because some of the SMEs simply can't afford to offer the huge well-being packages and services that the bigger corporations can offer. However, I certainly do find that SMEs tend to they tend to offer more a kind of a more caring and personalized service, whereas as a rule, the larger companies will partner with big brokers and get the deals through them.
Yeah, it's a really good, like you say, important to look at it like that, because a lot of SMEs, we work with some SMEs as well. They look at like the big companies and they say they've got all these bells and whistles and we can't compete. But actually, like you've said, actually a personal approach, looking at our employees, how can we make them feel valued? How can we, offer flexibility? How can we take that personal approach for an SME point of view? It's not about the bells and whistles, is it? It's not about the products that you've got. It's more about, the overall culture of the business, and SMEs can obviously benefit from that.
100% agree, and certainly from that side as well. It can be a case of it's a lot easier for that change and the more personalized approach to happen within SMEs. They can be very flexible on their offering, and as you mentioned, it's not all about cost. So you mentioned about creating a good company culture. That doesn't necessarily involve cost. For an SME, it's a lot easier to offer greater flexibility, different hours, and that's a lot easier to do in my opinion. I mean, it's not that it shouldn't be done across all organizations, but for SMEs, I think that's their attraction and their advantage, that they can do that, and it can be a lot more personalized approach. But it doesn't have to cost. You don't have to implement huge well-being strategies that are going to cost fortunes. There's some very good free resources, and I just think more so than ever, it's just about managing the kind of being open and honest about your approach to it, and so everyone feels comfortable discussing it. If they have an issue, raising it and saying, look, I'm going to need some help. I might need some time off. How can you support me? And again, that support doesn't need to be, we'll offer you, a very expensive counselling service or what have you. It might be they just need a little bit of time off to sort things out in their personal lives or something. So again, it doesn't have to involve huge cost.
Yeah, and it's kind of like you say, for the big organizations, it's hard to get out of that one size fits all kind of approach. But when you're sort of in an SME, you can kind of take that almost individual approach as well. But yeah, Steve, you definitely don't look old enough to have worked 20 years in HR, right?
You're being very kind there. You're being very kind. I certainly feel it.
But especially, I suppose after the last year as well. But in terms of, from the work that we do, we work with a lot of HR professionals in sort of, the kind of looking at well-being and their mental health strategy. But, definitely I've seen from an outsider is how stretched and overwhelmed and exhausted HR has been in the last year because of, obviously for obvious reasons. But, think back to like 20 years ago, right? What's the kind of differences that you've seen in sort of HR from when you first started into now?
Yeah, I mean, although the last 12 months have been so challenging for everyone, and there's so many sad stories coming out of it and difficult stories, and so I don't want to say it's been a positive period, because it's certainly just been so it has been so difficult. However, from an actual HR point of view, I think HR as a function has been really elevated, and their role that they can play and the value they can add. I think it has really helped HR from that side, and I think the appreciation of what they can do from the business. So 20 years ago, it was very much seen more as an administrative function. But again, I think the just general approach to work was just doing more work. The more you can do, the better. Certainly, when I was at Lehman Brothers, it was a case of you can't be the first to leave, and people were working there and staying there all night within companies, and that was the long hours culture existed throughout the HR team too. And I just think certainly over the past 12 months, I mean, there's been a gradual change anyway, I believe, but it's really come to the fore over the past 12 months or so around different characteristics that are important. So leading with empathy, creating an environment of trust, and really focusing on and realizing the importance of well-being. And you mentioned before about creating the right culture, and that certainly I think is a shift from my side, where HR have been pushing that for a long period of time, I think, but I don't believe it's ever been as important and accepted by businesses as being as important as it is now.
Yeah, it's a really good point of looking at it as well. It's been a tough year, but it has definitely sort of shared a bit of enlightenment about how much HR actually do, and when stuff like this happens, right, it's everyone kind of looks at HR and says, what are we doing here? And I always kind of make the joke when it comes to mental health and well-being that businesses have seen it as such this simple thing that we can all cure, right? And the way that they do that is they look at someone in HR and they say, hey, staff morale is down, can you do something about it, right? And their HR are sort of, it's hard enough managing our own mental health, let alone then every single employee that we have to kind of, do, as well as all of the other stuff that we have to do in HR too. So it's definitely, as you say, accelerated almost the awareness around how important HR is. And yeah, I'm guessing it must have been massively different 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, very much. So, as I say, and what you mentioned there, I think a key point is better prevention is better than cure. And I know it's a well-known saying, but I really do think that. And I think there's a really good opportunity for HR now to push some really good initiatives around well-being, around creating a really open culture, and really driving some key characteristics. As I mentioned before, leading with trust, leading with empathy, leading with optimism, and really pushing those at the moment ahead of, rather than in a reactive way, to start doing it more proactive as we start to ease out of lockdown, and which is going to create very much its own challenges as well.
Yeah, and I'm guessing from your perspective as a consultant and kind of working with the MDs directly and owners, what's been their biggest challenge over this last year, and what's their kind of biggest challenges now that you're seeing across the board?
Yeah, I think initially the biggest challenge overnight really was they had to move the whole of their company to remote working.
Yeah.
So I think that created its own challenges, and certainly from an HR point. But in terms of challenges for the business, more so from an HR point, because there's obviously aspects like IT and what have you being set up, which is vital for things to work. But for certainly from an HR point, I think there's some really big challenges, like have you trained your line managers how to manage their teams remotely, and how are people ensuring their well-being? How do you communicate within the business and really keep the company culture going when everyone is remote? And there's so many new challenges. The boundaries between personal life and work life are so blurred at the moment, I think, and for many people, and how do you manage that in the right way, and keep the businesses going? Because there's other big challenges, such as, do you need to put people on furlough, and all of the rules are changing, and the law is changing all the time. So just keeping on top of that is very difficult. And I think everyone is doing the best they can, but there's certainly some big challenges around that, and really just helping everyone manage the whole change over the constant change over the past 12 months.
Yeah, it's as you were just talking, I was just thinking about like what we've done, and we launched just before this all happened, and we gave away a 6-month free trial to our platform, and sort of worked with 100 odd companies on that. I did a video about working from home, productivity, being productive while working from home. Then we did a guide about dealing with the extended lockdown, and all of that seemed like such this distant memory. Yeah. And then just before this call, I'm talking to my team about creating some free value in terms of and content around the emotions that employees are going to deal with and experience when we're going back to work, right? And it's kind of, as you say, you just made me realize it's just never ending, right? It's like there's always seems to be another challenge, or something else we've got to focus on, and that can be overwhelming and daunting for HR and business owners as well. So working with, I guess, people like you who's got that experience and got that knowledge to almost take it away from them in a way must have been massively helpful for them during this time.
Yeah, certainly. And, I think I mentioned before that it was a big opportunity for HR, and I certainly, I certainly believe that is the case. And it's a case of really, it is a difficult time for everyone. So to be able to help, and that goes from the MD of a business, right the way through to all the employees. So really being able to help them manage that change and going through the change process. And I really think from that side, having the empathy, and because suddenly we're seeing people sitting in their living rooms, and senior managers, employees are seeing senior managers, seeing their houses, their more personal life. As we all know, there's I think they're called Zoom bombs, where children or animals coming into the picture. But I think that side of it has really helped. Has really personalised the approach and helped the culture from that side. But and I think it's creating an environment of trust and a culture of trust that you mentioned about the culture before, where people aren't afraid to make mistakes, because people are going to make mistakes because there's so many changes, so much challenge. But I think if everyone, I like to see good intent in everyone, and if everyone is doing things with the right intentions and looking to support, and people are open and honest enough to say it's not working, we don't believe it's working, and that comes back to managers having regular check-ins with their teams and having putting aside time to have personal check-ins. So we've got to check in on Monday morning. What are we talking about work? No, it's just how was your weekend? How did everything go? Is everything all right with your family? Or if you're living on your own, how are things going? And just having a much more personal chat and making sure everyone's okay from that side, and keeping keeping your employees happy and the people in the business happy is the most important thing at the moment.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, it's something that we've helped companies with as well, because I kind of say, if me and you were in the office, right, and I would walk past and say, hey Steve, how was your weekend? And you'd tell me, and I'd walk off and I'd go get a coffee and I'd come back, and that'd be it. But no one is I wouldn't message you and say, hey Steve, do you want to jump on a 1-minute Zoom so I can ask you how your weekend was? And then and I'm going to disconnect. So like you've said, there's almost there almost has to be personal responsibility, whether you're a manager or not, to check in with other employees and just ask them how they are, and ask them how they're doing, because we've lost that disconnection, those kind of coffee, those water cooler moments when you can just have a conversation with someone and just check in with them. So it's really, really kind of important that you said that, and something that needs to still be encouraged, as you say, when you go back to the workplace as well, to make sure that people are checking in with each other regularly as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the key areas that I've been helping companies with is around employee engagement as well. So it's just, as you say, keeping employees engaged, but it's not a straightforward process with everyone suddenly moving remotely, and how do you do that, and how often's too often. And I know initially there were things, people were setting up like Zoom calls and saying, right, we'll have a pizza night tonight, and it'll all be great. And then some employees were saying, I don't want to eat in front of I'm not comfortable eating in front of other people. And, and so it was a case of they're trying to do the right thing. It's not working for everyone. And then I think from my side, it's just looking at it and saying, put things out there that can help everyone, get people's feedback. What do they enjoy? What don't they enjoy? What do they want? And teams are going to be different. And that's where the more personalized approach will come in. There may be some teams who, want to do group meetings. Some teams want to do one-to-one. Some teams, they like the pizza night idea, and others that want to take a different approach to that. And that's all fine. Everyone has their own ways of dealing with matters, and how they get the best out of it. And I think that training the line managers to be able to support people as such is key.
Yeah, it's funny because this is going to be the next question, Steve. So I'm glad you went onto the subject of engagement, because a lot of the work that I do and we do is exactly as you've said. How many times has companies guessed what their employees want? And when you're looking at mental health, it's, oh, I know what they'll like. They'll like a yoga session, and we'll do a yoga session and everyone will love it. And, or we'll train some mental health first aiders, and then that will be the solution. And as you said, there's very little two-way conversations between the organization and the employees. So as you've said, as that prime example, those pizza sessions may be really valuable and great for some employees. For others, it's not going to be. But it's like trying a lot and seeing what works, learning from it, listening to employees, and then continuing to do more. And this is definitely, I think this pandemic has caused issues with engagement, but also has allowed employers to try a little bit more, almost be a little bit more flexible. Like, we'll do it on Zoom. They've got to almost think outside the box, right? But yeah. What have you seen that's been effective in terms of engaging with employees?
I think there's a number of points, and the first point is you can't over communicate. So it's just people might not want to have individual one-to-ones all the time, and that's fine. Again, that's where you mentioned you get the feedback. But one thing I've always stressed is that you can't communicate too much. If you're sitting there thinking, should I send another business update out? Yes, you should. It's not. You don't need to think about that. People want to know, and people want to know what's available. You mentioned about the difference between big companies and small companies earlier. But I know so often that these big companies had fantastic offerings and some fantastic support mechanisms, but the employees didn't know about it, and the companies assumed that everyone knew.
Yeah.
And it was a case of, well, yeah, we do have a healthcare offering, but did you also know the healthcare offering offered these additional points? You get, free cinema tickets. You can get money off Amazon, or money off, all these different areas. But people weren't aware of it, and they weren't aware of the different offerings. So certainly, from engagement has never been more important, I don't think. And again, I think people who are maybe worried to try something new, I agree with what you said, that it's become a lot more relaxed around that. And I think, again, that comes partly down to trust, and partly down to not being afraid to make mistakes, because everyone is learning all the time. So that their companies are very open to saying, well, we'll try anything. We just want to keep everyone engaged. And I also think not physically being there keeps the engagement at the forefront of your mind. Whereas if you're in the office all day, things are getting very busy. And when you're seeing someone every day, we don't need to have a catch up because I see him every day anyway. When actually you probably do. You should be having those catch ups, but without actually seeing people all the time, I think it drives that a bit more and highlights the importance of having those catch ups.
Yeah, I love that you can't over communicate, because I hear it a lot with mental health. It's, well, we sent 2 emails this year about mental health and no one replied. And I always question that. I'm like, it takes a lot for someone to reply to a mental health email, right? Because when you're looking at stigma of mental health, you're looking at the complexity of it, you're looking at everything else. It doesn't mean that people are going to reply. But what I've learned by talking about mental health is that one email could help someone and they might not even reply. It might really, really cause them to think about something, or to take an action, or to know that their staff value their mental health. And that communication has done that for them, but you'll never know about that because they haven't told you, but it still has that impact. So like you've said, when it comes to communication, like one thing that we do with all of our clients is send them communications to send out throughout the year, like 12, 15, 20 pieces of content and webinars, everything for the whole year around mental health and well-being. And whether you use it or not, it's fine. It's up to you. But it's just important that, as you say, you can have tools, you can have well-being initiatives, but if you haven't got engagement and communication, they're just a waste of money, right? And it's important that you kind of focus there. So, really love that tip. And I guess, like you said, as the company gets bigger, almost engagement becomes more difficult as well.
But more important, at the same time, I think what you say, I still believe that there is a stigma around mental health and talking about mental health, and a lot of people say men are the worst at it, and I'm probably a big culprit myself, so I take that on board. But it certainly, the more you communicate, I believe, the more it becomes kind of easier to talk about, and as I mentioned before, you can't over communicate about it. So if it's out there all the time, and managers lead by example, they act as role models, and they say, how's your weekend? And rather than just saying, oh, fine, it can be a case of, well, actually, it wasn't a great weekend. It was really tough. It was challenging. I found it hard. And everyone has their downtimes, I think, during this. So, just making that sort of, to say, look, it's fine to say this, but also, again, when you mention about the communication and regular communication, I think it's so important to have the regular communication to say what is available. Here's all the resources. And as you say, you may never know people use them, depending on what data you can collect on it. But there's lots of free resources out there that people can use for different things. So, I just think it is so important. And from a mental health point of view, rolling out one wellbeing day a year, that's not your mental health strategy, and it's not managing it effectively, and helping people as such. And one thing I have done during lockdown is increase the number of podcasts I listen to.
Nice.
And I was listening to one the other day, and one company, I actually hadn't heard of this, and it may be more common, but I just thought it was a great way of doing it. Is that they have a free counselling service for all employees. And when you start, you're auto enrolled, but it's opt out.
Nice.
So you can opt out, and that's absolutely fine. There's absolutely no pressure on anyone to do it. But to try and take some of the stigma of it away, everyone is automatically enrolled in it. So then if someone goes, oh, I'm going to a counseling session, it's not someone saying, oh, did you sign up for that? They're like, no, it's just the one that's offered. So I thought I'd take it. And because, the effects on people, the causes, and I don't know I'm no expert on mental health and what have you, but the reported causes can be financial, they can be personal, professional. There's so many different things. So people can say, yeah, I've got I'm seeing the counsellor, and other people are saying, well, it could be about anything. It could be about finances or what have you. But because everyone's auto enrolled, it's not a shock if someone says I'm going. They're just saying, well, I'm taking up the option of the free offer that I've been given.
Yeah, I love that. So it's a good way of looking at it, and very similar to kind of the way I see it is we talk about like the funnel, 3 pillars, which is promote, provide, protect. And protect is your counselling, your EAP, but typically you've only got a small minority of people that go there when they're in crisis, right? Same with me, my own journey. You wait until you're in that sort of rock bottom point before you say, hold on, I think I need to go and speak to someone. But actually, when you're looking at the stigma, the promote stage, if I said to a colleague, I'm going to see a counselor, I'm, speaking to someone, then there's going to be that shift of judgment, whether there is or not, because, oh, I'm the only one using this counselor, none of my colleagues are. So when you actually flip that, as you've said, and counseling or therapy becomes more of a proactive strategy rather than a reactive strategy, it then becomes more normalized. Like you say, I kind of always joke about therapy. I'm a big advocate for therapy now, but, in the UK in particular, we only see therapy as you only go there when you're broken. So like if you said to me, I'm going to see a therapist, I'd be like, well, what's wrong, Steve? Is everything okay? And automatically it's what's happened. Whereas now I see therapy as personal training for the mind, right? This is the biggest threat to my life as a man under 45. And I'm sure you know that. So, going to see a therapist is personal training. It's like, I want to make sure that I'm staying on top of that. So I really love that approach of normalizing counseling in an organization.
Yeah, and again, on some of the podcasts I've listened to, I've heard so many business people saying, really successful entrepreneurs or sports people, and they've all said, they went to therapy because they hit rock bottom, whereas and they were like, now they continue doing it, and they have people speaking to them saying, "Oh, you're still going to therapy? Is still an issue?" And like, no. They're no longer an issue. I'm in a much better place now, but it's just good to keep going, and it's not as you mentioned, it's prevention and protection, rather than waiting till you have to hit rock bottom and look for the cure. It's much easier a process if you're going regularly and it's a preventative measure, then great. But I've also listened to a few people say about, if you break your arm, you go to hospital. There's no stigma around that. It's just well, you've broken your arm, you have to go to hospital. If it's a physical injury, then fine. But if you've got a mental injury and you go to counselling to fix it, there's suddenly a stigma around that. And I'm like, well, there's no stigma around if I've broken my arm and going to hospital. I wouldn't be afraid of saying that. So why is there still the stigma around the mental health? But I certainly think that stigma is improving. I believe personally in the dealing in my experiences, the stigma is there still, but it's becoming a lot better. And companies like yourself who are promoting it and making it become more, I don't like to say it in this way, but become more normal and more commonplace. So there is no stigma around it, and I think companies, as I say, like yourselves, are really driving that and driving the agenda. And I certainly am from an HR point, and I think it can only improve from here. I certainly think there has been improvements, and I think it will continue to do so.
Yeah, and I think one of the key points that you've touched on a couple of times, just from the advice that you've given, is that vulnerability, right? for a manager or for an employee to say, you know what, no, I didn't have a very good weekend, and just be honest. You know, like you said, that doesn't cost a thing, right? Does not cost a penny, but it just has a massive impact on, as you say, stigma, culture. If you can almost be a little bit more vulnerable in the workplace. And I think as well, you kind of touched on the you know, the work that was, if you were the last one out, you were like the best, right? And that whole toxic culture of, you know, you need to work more and work more and work more and work more. Do you feel that that's kind of changed? So like the 9 to 5 or the 9 to 9, I guess, and in some cases, do you feel like that has started to change, you know, as we sort of transition back?
I definitely think, you know, it's become more talked about. So I do think there are signs that it can change, and I think it needs to change. And I think a lot of employees, if more of the reports I'm reading, are saying, I don't want to go back to the office full time. You know, so I'm working all those hours. I like my work-life balance. So certainly, I think that there are some changes. I'm sure you read the recent stories about Goldman's with the interns working 95-hour weeks and what have you. And so I don't think that it's fully there yet at all. But the focus on it and really, you know, what the employees are wanting, and it's certainly the millennials coming through who are looking for roles. They're far more than I've ever seen, focused on, you know, the social responsibilities, wanting flexibility and what have you. So that will certainly, I believe, drive, you know, an increase towards that. And I think if companies don't offer, you know, the support and the flexibility that people are looking for, I think they will have real problems attracting and retaining employees, because people don't want to do it anymore. You know, and it's a case of, so I do think there is some change, but one area I tend to help my clients with is around the whole piece on job design and you know, focusing on outcomes, you know, and not on, you know, are you in for, you know, are you in the office for 15 hours a day or 16 hours a day or 20-hour days, what have you. It's not a case of that, and it's not the always on. It's a case of getting the balance right, but being very productive and you know, and getting the work done. And it's not a case of, or how did you do it? It's a case of, you know, the work has been done. I've been very productive, and you know, and that's all good. And that's where it comes back to partly the training of the line managers to say, be very clear. Be very clear what you want, what you're expecting from your employees, and then let them get on with it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I could talk about this for ages, Steve, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you could as well. One last question, and this is a bit of a selfish question because I'm quite intrigued by that podcast. What's the podcast you've been listening to? Do you remember the names of them? Because it'd be good to kind of recommend a couple more as well.
Yeah, I mean, I try and make out that I'm purely business focused on my podcast, but I'm certainly not. So I try to balance it between the few. I listen to a few Audible books, for example. The Miracle Morning is something I've just been listening to.
Is it How Elrod?
Yeah, which is a fantastic book, and something I really like. The podcast, the High Performance Podcast by Jake Humphrey.
Okay, nice.
And
yeah, that's he has some amazing guests, like lots of footballers and that, right?
Fantastic. Lots of sports people, but it's certainly not just sports people. There's some fantastic business people. I've just listened to the latest one, which was with, and I can't remember the lady's name, so I won't get it wrong, but she came up in The Apprentice and set up Tropic Skincare with Alan Sugar.
Okay.
And it's about her journey, and absolutely amazing. So successful, but very humble and what have you. It's really, really good. But the people they get on are really, really good. So I focus on that quite a lot, the high performance. And then I listen to some others. I'm biased. I'm from just by Liverpool, from the Wirral. So I listen to some of the people around there. So some of the motivational podcasts. So there's one called the Leggett Podcast with Andy Grant, and he's a gentleman who lost half his leg. He was blown up in Afghanistan, when he was serving for the Royal Marines. So I listened to that. They have some really fascinating guests on, and something that I really enjoy from that side. But and any business podcast, to be honest, that are out there, I tend to focus on entrepreneurs or consulting. Michael Zapersky has one around consulting, and that's certainly something that's really good. And any focus on well-being. Health and well-being is something that fitness industry and nutrition is something that really interests me. So I try to listen to that, and then without sounding too boring, I do listen to some HR podcasts as well.
Nice. It's a good mix there, right? And all of them come into one. Like they sound pretty similar to mine as well.
So what ones do you listen to? Have you got any that you recommend?
Podcasts I've actually not been listening to as much. I've been listening to a lot of audio books at the moment. So there's a book that I've been listening to by Michael Singer. It's called Untethered Soul. A little bit spiritual, but it simplifies life, in my opinion. Just trying to think of some others. I've been listening to there's a business podcast called My First Million. And it's literally the reason why I love it is there's these two entrepreneurs, and they just take loads of ideas and they just spit them out, and they decipher whether they're going to be a good idea or not. And my mind as an entrepreneur is always coming up with random ideas, and the last couple of years I've conditioned myself to not run with every single idea and just focus on Everymind, and that's it. So that podcast kind of allows my mind to just run a little bit wild and see all these ideas going to into
work out how to set up your next business, eh?
Oh yeah, no, don't go there, Steve, because the whole entrepreneur mind, as I'm sure you know, will see a better opportunity, and before you know it, you're still in square one. And then I have listened to a couple of, like you say, the high performance podcasts. I think what I like about the way they do that is you look at like performance, and you actually see the mental health element behind it, right? Like you was kind of saying, as a high performing athlete, as an example, almost focusing on your mental health and your mindset is almost normalized, because for you to perform at that level of, let's say, world-class footballer, you need to make sure this is in the right place because it impacts your performance. And then you look at the workplace, and almost we neglect how important that is for performance at work, right? And yeah, I've listened to a couple of those interviews and they're great as well.
Yeah, and I just think it's more looking at the whole approach and the similarities between sport and business. There's one on the High Performance podcast. There's one with Clive Woodward, and it's absolutely fascinating because he set up a business first, then he obviously moved into the England rugby team, and the similarities and the leadership skills that he shows are very similar across both. But it's so interesting, and I think you mentioned before about vulnerability. And it's actually realizing that all these hugely successful people have all failed at different times, and they all have, the same vulnerabilities as us all. And I know there's a lot of talk about imposter syndrome and what have you, but so many people, have it, and it's just, it's just how they manage that, and that certainly, comes across in a lot of the podcasts I listen to.
Yeah, and just as you were talking, I remember a book I read years ago called Bounce. By Matthew Syed. I've just pulled it up. It's called Bounce. It's the myth of talent and the power of practice. And that book basically looks at, like, I think it was Mozart, Beckham, Picasso, I think Usain Bolt, and it looks at what do they all have in common. And a lot of it was, as you say, the kind of the mindset, failing multiple times, just pushing on. Rituals, David Beckham had a certain ritual before every game to make sure he was in the right headspace. And yeah, it's a really interesting book. And I think, as you said, lots of people can learn from that level of performance and bring it back sort of into the workplace as well. Final question, how are you getting on with the Miracle Morning? That's the big one. Yeah,
well, I'm quite a morning person, so it's kind of one thing I have found with a lot of them is that it's not, for me, it's not about, we've mentioned a number of times in our chat about a personalized approach, and I just try and pick up small hints and tips from as many different sources as they can. And some will work and some don't. But mornings tend not to be an issue for me. The biggest thing for me is getting outside. And obviously, without the daily commute and what have you, I have to make sure I get my time outside in order to get through the day, shall we say. But I just think it helps so much, even if it's just 5 minutes. And I've heard people doing fake commutes and what have you. But one thing I do in the mornings, without fail, regardless of the weather, I have it that I get up and I get outside first. Nice. and at least it doesn't have to be anything, anything huge. I like the running, and I do a bit of that, but it's just a case of getting outside. So the miracle morning actually isn't too much of a problem for me. How about yourself? Is that something you look to do? Or
I can't remember when I read it. I read it years ago, and it's savers, isn't it? So you've got scribing, I think, which is journaling, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, or maybe yes, it's scribing. I can't remember. But it's all of them, and same as you. I remember trying it and then thinking this is way too much, like every morning. And actually it was just one or two of those that I then, as you say, embed into my day. Mine's the same. I've got to do a bit of exercise in the morning, whether it's just like jumping on, we've got like a little spin bike in the kitchen at the moment.
Perfect. Yeah.
Or like you say, walking my youngest to school, just whatever, just get outside. And yeah, so I don't do, as you say, the whole routine. It's just like one or two that work from the book.
Yeah. And I think, for me, certainly, and a lot of people I've spoken to, certain things work well. So as you mentioned, journaling and visualization might work well for you. But then for me, I'll be like, it just, I've tried it, it didn't really work out. But when I do enjoy it, I like, for example, meditation, or do a bit of yoga, or, it's just that whatever works for you, then fine. And I think it's just going into and approaching all these different activities just with a very open mind. It may work, it may not, but there's no harm in giving it a try. And if it doesn't work, then fine. And one thing I'm not very good at is if it doesn't work first time, I kind of like, it's not going to suit me. But it's giving it a reasonable period to work well.
Yeah, amazing. Steve, where can people find out about you and the consultancy?
Yeah, so from my website, basically, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on quite a lot of social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, and what have you. But certainly, I have a website where everyone can visit. It's www.herts, which is HertsHR.co.uk. And you can certainly contact me there. And it obviously be fascinating and be great to hear from anyone. And I'm really open to having a chat about anything and how I can help and add value to the business and help improve things with employees.
Amazing. Steve, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
No problems. No, thank you very much. And really, really good to speak to you and learn a lot from it. So thanks very much.